I'm Steve Sinclair, and I'm a creative director of Warframe.
So, when did you start here at DE?
I started right at the end of Unreal Tournament,
Okay.
like Unreal Tournament '99. I think
last millennium.
Yes. So I have been here. I think I'm the second longest term employee currently. I think there's the guy who voices Ordis has been here just slightly longer than I have. But I remember it well because I got an email from James, and I thought it was a joke because for some reason, they decided to open an office in London, Ontario, and it was a 5-minute walk away from the condo I was living in.
Oh my God. And
I was programming, hobby stuff, and I had like a little crappy website, you know, I'm sure it's even before, it's like GeoCities era, and I was writing little exporters for 3D programs and thinking about getting into mods, and I got an email from James, would you like to come work on the team that made Unreal? And I couldn't believe it. I thought it was a joke, and so had you
applied, or did you get
I hadn't applied.
Cold call?
No, it was because I had this little goofy website, right? You know, and so I borrowed my friend's car so it looked like I, was worth something, and pulled my Pentium 266 and put it in the car and drove up, and I got the job that day. It was awesome.
So on that first UT99, you said like coming in pretty late.
Yeah, I came in. They were. I mean, it's so crazy to think of it. I was obsessed with the beta, and then the company that was making it hired me. So it was really, it really was a dream come true. It was hard to believe. I remember even my father, not to dwell on this, but you're bringing back a rush of memories. My father said, contact the Better Business Bureau because I don't believe you're going to actually be paid money to make video games. He couldn't believe it. And so that was incredible. So really, I didn't. I played the beta, and I contributed a bit of code to the patches because Windows 2000 came out, and there was like a problem in the TCP layer. But then I, continued to work on the franchise. Worked on Unreal Championship on the Xbox, the original Xbox One, the Xbox One, and worked on Unreal Tournament 2003, and so on and so forth.
So, like, I'm a huge Unreal franchise fan.
Sure.
What did you work on on Championship and on 2003?
On Championship, pretty much everything. I worked on weapons and progression. I'm a programmer. Was how I got my job here. So I programmed weapons, I programmed game modes, I programmed bots, bombing run, like all those kind of things. I remember one time when we moved offices, we had to have an electrician come in, and he had to come in late. I was the only one at the office, so I let him in, and he's kind of fiddling around and doing electrician things that are kind of complex to me. And he said, so you make video games here? And I said, yeah. He's like, whoa, any video game I might have heard of? And I'm like, yeah, Unreal Tournament 2003. I said, oh yeah, I really wanted to like that Unreal Tournament 2003, but you replace a sniper rifle with that god-awful lightning gun. And I'm like, yep, that was me. I made that. So yeah, we did kind of a lot of things. Like, it was really interesting for me on the first Xbox because that was like, we were like a launch title for their online service.
Right.
So it was like really nerve-wracking. And I remember, getting a tuxedo. We're coming in for the launch party at DE. Everyone's got, tuxedos on. They're fancy. It's like a casino thing. Everyone's drinking and partying. And I walk in, I'm going to party. And there's James and Poncho standing next to me, and they're just bloodless. No one can sign in, they say. No one can log in. And well, it's not a very good launch if no one can play the game. So I was just like, okay, take your jacket off, say no to the beer, run in the office on the phone with Microsoft. And of course, it's all this kind of the gore of game development. When we had a crush of influx, we had a timeout in a user interface because we had so many players, so we had to hack the back end to return less results. It was.
And this is before like patches could be easily pushed out, probably.
Yeah, in fact, you couldn't, right? It wasn't part of the lexicon. It's really interesting how that's changed. Warframe is kind of lives and dies by how frequent you can patch things. But yeah, so we had to hack the database servers on the back end for that before we could enjoy the party. So it was that was exciting. So yeah, the old DE that I worked at made some cool Unreal games with Epic, and then we hit the pitch circuit. Right, here's our idea for games. We tried to make this crazy sci-fi game that was called Dark Sector. That wasn't the Dark Sector that shipped. And that was, I remember that was living out of a suitcase for 6 months, traveling Europe and West Coast with a tech demo and a Cube PC. So you worked for them. You didn't work for ultimately your players or your customers. I don't like to call them that, but that's the biggest change.
Right.
The feeling like an underdog, the artistic pressures, the kind of feeling like there's a survival aspect or a gun to your head,
right.
Those have remained.
Right.
Right. You are constantly feeling like you have to keep up with the competitive pressures, with the changes in gamer tastes, with the technology. Those things are constant. I guess that's probably why I'm still here, because it really just feels like it always is changing and mutating and makes it extremely interesting and challenging.
Right.
So that's been constant.
And so while you're out sort of pitching your game to publishers,
that's right.
You're also taking on contracts from
yes,
publishers
of course.
too, right?
Yes, right. I expect this happens in a lot of domains, maybe not in music, but you walk in, you have a bleeding edge tech demo, you think, right? Like I remember when we got on CNN with it, and it says "Game of the Future." It just burned in my mind. It was 4:3 format, and I remember that with great pride. You walk in, you show this tech demo, and they say, "This is awesome. This is great. How would you like to make the sequel to this game instead?" Right? So, that wasn't really. I mean, it was very creatively upsetting and kind of soul destroying, because you're putting everything into this, but it got us work. And it kind of displayed competence. But they, as you know, publishers have their franchises, or I hate when they say like IP. It just makes me die inside. But they have that, and they want to build on that. And so we did that. We did what we call work for hire. And work for hire is. Well, it's kind of like, I think, is it Harari that calls it like the luxury trap. Work for hire is, we're going to pay you a lot to grow an extreme amount to your breaking limit, so that you have all these people to take care of with their families, their mortgages, and their hopes and dreams. We're going to pay you just enough to get to the end of the project. You better pray it earns out so you can get your royalties back.
Right.
So. You hand to mouth, you live in those times, and I think you are like many sort of middle-sized, mid-tier companies like we were and kind of still are. When you live in that situation, and you have maybe a budget overrun, or you have a change, and now all those milestone payments that you used to build the game, there's no buffer. Right. And the publishers really squeeze you. Well, how much is this buffered? So now when it ships, you really are kind of in a trap. You need your next gig. And if someone changes their mind, and we had this, if someone changes their mind, we had a project canceled, then you've got nothing left. There's not a lot of runway, and that's the end of it. So
presumably, if you expanded and contracted a bunch of times because of that?
Well, we didn't, and we fought hard against that, but Warframe is born of that exact circumstance, which is, Star Trek's ramping down rather, and soon, there won't be any more milestone payments coming in to keep the lights on. This other project that we had started that we thought was going to get greenlit, that publisher had a bad quarter and are now doing everything in-house. Like these are literally things happen. So. It was an awful time. We had a huge series of layoffs, and the development of Warframe is like, how fast can you make a game and get it out and actually have it make money? And so it was like, start in February, March, and the first bits of dollars roll in November. It was completely absurd, because you're usually used to changing your mind and working on a game for 3 or 4 years. So that was breaking out of that cycle. At great risk, with enough money to pay salaries for the next 40 days or 30 days, who knows, and being transparent as you can with your employees, right? And any qualified employee is going to be like, well, this doesn't look good. I need to take care of myself and my family. So Warframe was a happy accident that allowed us to break out of that cycle.
Right. Do you think you needed to break out of that cycle again? Because like right now, you're talking about mid-tier developers.
Yeah,
it's like, where
we
are
needed
they?
to break out of it, absolutely. And I remember, when James and I were, it was just in the middle of a regular old day, and James was like, well, what are we going to do next? Like, what are we pitching? And I was playing Super Monday Night Combat.
Right.
And Super Monday Night Combat was, by Uber, and the game was really interesting, and it was there wasn't a publisher for it, and it was what's all this noise in Korea? What's this free to play? And my interest was not free to play. Let's bilk the players, right? My interest was, well, the scope of that sounds like something we could do with how much we have left, and it better work, because that's it. So that, and again, when talking about that, that cycle was just not working for us, and even if the game was really good or critically acclaimed, you spend so much, and any overruns, you tend to eat those costs because you're passionate about making quality, so you don't have the buffer to make your own thing. Right. So you literally need to be making royalties on that console game that shipped a month or two after it's out, or you're in deep trouble if you don't have another project lined up.
Right.
So, yeah.
So, very quick turnaround from that sort of initial, let's start building this, to getting it out. But,
that's right.
But the framework was there, because we had seen the progenitor, right? We had seen, there was something that some work you were sort of building on.
That's right. And we had tried to make, a version of Dark Sector multiple times. We had made this kind of weird MMO prototype using Unreal. And we had kind of servers, and you could jump between them, and it was kind of starting to feel almost like, it was very precursor. The original Planet Side was coming out, and we're like, oh man, and World War II Online, like people were starting to make these kind of action games, but with an MMO context. We're really attracted to that. So we're kind of, cobbling together things and really not getting a lot of traction. And then working on some Unreal stuff. Okay, great. This is giving us the resources we need to try again. Working on the tech prototype and not quite getting traction. So we had ideas, we had art, we kind of had a rough vision of what that would look like. So a few of us went to James and said, okay, we think we can do this really fast if it's this and it's small scope. And we think that co-op is not served as it gives us an opportunity not to be kind of going against the giants.
Right.
And that was kind of part of, at least one of the things I really like is this Jack Trout differentiator die, and I think that was a big thing. So yeah, we did. We had those bits and pieces.
Right.
That art is in the game. That art came out before the original Xbox 360, and that art is in the game in the Corpus sets. If you're a Warframe player, you'll see very old normal maps in the time when normal maps were just being invented.
Right.
So yeah.
Can you talk about the sort of where the connective tissue between Warframe and Dark Sector kind of come together? Like, how did Dark Sector come to be the game it ended up being? Right.
So we had this idea that we would make. We all loved Metal Gear, and it was like, what would Metal Gear and like the Dark Crystal be if you put them together? So of course there would be like anime energy tentacles coming out of people's heads. There would be really cool robots, but the metal would be organic and changing. We had a lot of ideas, stealth elements. We had these we wanted to make science fiction that wasn't necessarily just like James Cameron science fiction. We wanted maybe some Frank Herbert science fiction. So we had these kind of ideas, and I went off and wrote a whole bunch of stuff about these characters, and the artists, Mike Brennan designed these beautiful, kind of very interesting enemies, and him and Jeff, worked on the original kind of what became our Excalibur suit. And we went around and pitched it, and this was kind of when Halo was sort of a thing starting to emerge, but every publisher said no one likes sci-fi and they won't sell consistently every time. we, space is lame. Spaces and then insert politically incorrect term. So as that runway was running out and I was getting desperate and we were getting chain yanked by publishers, one publisher said, well, we don't like the hero, he's too feminine, can he have an eye patch? Like literally crazy things like that.
Okay.
So I would go to one of the most talented artists in the video game industry, Mike Brennan, I'd say, can you give him a ragged ear and an eye patch, right? And I'm asking him, I felt like a heel because I had to live between the artists and, trying to get it signed, right? And so he would send me back something that's just absolutely preposterous. But it was getting so close to signing, but just wasn't. And it was dragging on and dragging on. So we did a pivot. We said, oh, it's going to be, okay, those sci-fi stuff, fine. Okay, so it's going to be more like Resident Evil than it is going to be like, Dark Crystal in space. So we kind of made these compromises in order to land the deal, and we did.
Right.
But all those wacky sci-fi ideas remained lurking. And we use those now in Warframe liberally.
Right.
Yeah. So now we're kind of in charge of it, so now we can kind of do what we want to.
You were like sci-fi blue-balled a little bit. So
exactly, yes, absolutely.
Where do you start? Like, where did you go play a lot of free-to-play games? Like, what was the sort of initial idea for what you thought Warframe was going to be?
I was really inspired by the independence that Uber Entertainment had with its Monday Night Combat, and I thought that was really interesting. And what was the kind of noise that was happening in Korea? It sounded like, the inspiration was, can we make something small? I mean, back the clock up 2 years, that would have been an XBLA game, right?
Right.
But XBLA didn't seem to be landing the hits that maybe independent developers like we were hoping it would. And so that seemed like, okay, well, here's another option. So we had the pieces of those sci-fi ideas and, look at the top games on Steam. Okay, what aren't these? What aren't they doing? But at the same time, we still had strong feelings about serving a co-op audience, right? Some of us might have a little gray in our beards, and we can't keep up with the youngins. So I love that kind of type of gameplay. It's still fast and it's action-centric, but it is not focused on competition. I felt like there wasn't a lot of that. So the easy pitch we gave to people was, well, it's like Left 4 Dead, but in space. And so we probably said that a lot to people when, again, we went out. The same thing happened, man. We went out and we tried to get a publisher, but instead of getting an American publisher to do a console game, we went to Korean publishers or Chinese publishers and said, can you give us some money to make this game? Free to play is big in your market, and it's going to be Left 4 Dead in space. And what did they say? Space sucks. Too bad it's space. I remember we crunched for 2 months we literally made a game demo in 2 months with a very small group of people, one artist, one level designer, a couple programmers. And we made what was the Warframe demo. And we probably have video footage that Dave can give you of it. And we rented a suite in the Hilton, and we had the largest free-to-play publishers in the world, the richest. I don't need to name them, but you can just Google, who's the richest? Here they come. And they walked in, and they said, this is great, I can't believe this. What an exciting meeting, I'm so good. And in slow motion, and the record needle scratch, because it was sci-fi.
Right.
And they just walked out.
When I think about games that were building communities back then, I think of Mass Effect and Borderlands. And surely you guys are ticking...
Because it's Western.
Right.
Right, but combat arms is not sci-fi, right? I mean, they added some of that stuff. But yeah, so it was hilarious. It was like history repeating itself. No one wanted to, in the market we were trying, again, we had gone to the other side of the earth, but again, what our ideas, the creative, framing of the game was completely rejected and wrong.
Almost because it was unique.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, absolutely, because it was unique, absolutely. And I mean, at that same time, I remember one of those guys that came to the studio, they did the tour, they looked at what we'd been building, And his reaction was interesting. It was, this is the best looking free-to-play game I've ever seen. Right. You will fail. Dave and I just looked at each other. Oh, kill me now. So why are we going to fail? Well, because the game can't look this good and update as often as you need to build your community. And of course that was like, you know, when you get like a, what do you know, when you brand your cattle, that was like branded on my ass, like frequent, fast updates. How are we going to do this? So a lot of early tech in Warframe, like the procedural levels and that sort of stuff, completely geared to that kind of idea of frequent updating.
So then eventually, I guess, the publishing money didn't come in, so
you didn't
self-funded it? Or?
That's correct. Sure did not. And I remember in November, I think it was November, we saw this, it was MechWarrior. And they had, if you're a fan of MechWarrior, why don't you, it was like the Kickstarter, right? Crowdfunding. Buy a founder's pack and support the game that you want to see made, right? And it's like an interesting identity choice. Well, let's do that, we thought, you know? And I remember running into the office in November and right into the middle of a programmer meeting. They're all talking about problems. And I just burst in the door. We made $1,500 yesterday, you know? And they looked at me. I mean, it's not enough to pay them, right? That's not enough to keep the lights on. But my God, the look of shock on their face that people would actually pay for Warframe, you know, they were astounded. And so we just built it from there.
With like a new IP as well. It's not like
yes, with a new IP and with websites we made ourselves and all this craziness. But I just, you know, it really felt like, you know, you were under the gun because those publishers didn't bite. And so it was, can we make money before the end of the year? And that was like, okay, so 9 months to make a game.
Right.
Or whatever it ended up being. And that's what we did. And then we rolled into December and people started, you know, supporting us.
So how did that 9 months look like? What were you doing? What was the majority of the work going into?
Right, 9 months. So that 9 months was building the procedural level system, trying to build as many of the beginning Warframes as possible so that we could have, you know, a minimum set. Scott had his goal. And then trying to invent an infrastructure for this kind of so-called back-end. Right. Because we have MMO light features, account persistence. None of that stuff we had any understanding of. So that was really becoming, you know, building all the stuff you need for independence. Now you got to make your own website. Now you have to make your own, you know, customer support portal. How do you accept payments from people when you sell them a founder's pack? How do you get certification to take credit cards from people? How does all that work? So it really was, I felt really strongly I didn't want to work for 9 months. Our technical culture is like, it has to be real. So like when you see a demo, when Warframe has a new feature, we really try to make it real. We don't try to do smoke and mirrors and like the animator made this. We really try to be as truthful as possible, you know, to ourselves as well. So it was really a lot of like back-end infrastructure and database stuff, while the artist, right, you know, scrambled to make as much of that kind of procedural level stuff that we could do to support, you know, keeping people interested. And it was reading about, reading about trying to understand how you sell things to people, and how do you make a free-to-play game that isn't gross? Right. And really, that became really a group kind of project. But that was as simple, like my education was like, why do things cost what they do? Like literally reading crappy economics books. Like, what's fair? Like, why is a coffee this much instead of this much? Which I highly recommend, Priceless, The Myth of Fair Value, which is really an interesting book about that. And of course, watching every GDC talk you ever could on how free-to-play games were currently working and what was important to them. I was really interested in having, again, so we didn't get nothing out of these failed meetings with these publishers, right? Because one said you're going to fail because you're not going to update often, and I had my like, okay, here's my short list of things we must do, update often. And that continues to be our whole kind of reason for existence. The other one was a meeting with a publisher who said, our game is a free-to-play publisher. They are still the biggest, and they have all the biggest. They just make billions, these guys. And I'm in the room with these people, and they said to me, our game kind of sucks, but we have the best customer service there is.
Right.
And I was like, oh, buy a book about customer service. You know, and there's the Macy's, the fabled Macy's story that you may or may not have heard. Customer comes in with winter tires and says, these don't fit my car, I'd like to return them. And they say, yes, very good, ma'am, and accepts the returns. And of course, the fable is Macy's doesn't sell tires. Right. But they cared more about that customer in the long term than the short term. And that really stuck out to me. Out of the 500 pages in that book, there's like, 2 pages that are blazing in my mind. Same with a resort, right? The resort doesn't want to milk you for right now and right here in the same way Macy's didn't want to. They want you for the long term. And so that's really, there's a bunch of us that kind of touch the monetization of Warframe. But I think the shared thing is we want a long-term relationship with you, which means we don't want to get you hard now. We want to say, if you stick around for a year, then that's fine.
Right.
That's much more valuable over the long term.
Where were the big moments for you where you sort of saw the shift in, oh, people are coming on board, or we're getting more players in, or?
Right.
Or what were those first couple of months like when it was out in the wild?
Yeah, the first couple of months was just seeing. I don't check numbers anymore because it really is like a huge source of anxiety for me. So I don't do this anymore. But at that time, it really meant the difference between how many more people would we have to lay off. Right. And it really, I mean, as we opened with, I've been here a long time. It's kind of like a family. And so, and James has always felt really strongly about keeping these people together. You know, it's not like a film crew where you strike it and then you reassemble. So we tried to keep, the band together as much as we could. But yeah, those first months of coming in and watching founders make big purchases and having that kind of get the runway then started growing and saying, well, now we can pay people for 2 more months or 3 more months. So that was huge for me to see that it actually had potential. And there was some threshold in there early, so that would be November when I think we started doing that. I remember Christmas Day when I deleted the database. Right. People were having XP bugs and I logged in to create my own version of the database to simulate the bug, and I was still connected to the production database and destroyed every account in the game. That was very bad, and I had to call Glenn on Christmas and say, hi, it's me, I deleted everything, and we had to figure out if our backup system would work, and it did. That was an awful moment that we have to laugh about now to save yourself from crying. But yeah, I think it was really early in spring that it started to feel like we're now at this point where we can tread water and keep trying to build it. But it was really tenuous. It felt go, no go, right? There's laws about if you need to lay people off, you have to give them a severance. Right. And that comes out of this reserve, right? So there's a point where you are really going to screw people over if you go right to the limit. Right. So yeah, it was extremely nerve-wracking. But when we went onto Steam and we had that kind of Steam launch and we had this huge influx of players and this huge influx of people buying Platinum and supporting us, and that was like, oh, okay. Well, now the problem is not just survival. The problem is retention and keeping them coming back and growing the content. And we have one level in the game. Like, let's fix that. You know, that kind of thing. That was a big shift, at least in my mind, was when the big Steam audience came. Right. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that comes up a lot, actually, especially for folks like us who are sort of diving into it. I played Warframe at various intervals over the past couple of years.
That's right.
But who sort of really dove into it again more recently, is that maybe not because, but an aspect I'm sure of pivoting and adding in all of these different elements is then the sort of I don't know what you call it, the like
mess?
Onboarding or whatever.
The mess of it?
The mess? Yeah, you could say a mess.
The mess of it, yeah.
There's a lot to figure out
Yeah.
in terms of, there are people who say they've played for like 1,000 hours and still feel like they're figuring it out.
Yep.
A lot of people have spoken to that as a negative, but is there a positive aspect to that? You guys have your own like weird like subculture of gaming happening here.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, you know, we have the initial bits of lore, you know, weren't intentionally inspired by that Dark Souls vibe where they don't tell you anything. You got to look for it. I mean, that was just a function of how few people we had working on the game, and a function of, well, we don't know those answers, so we're gonna drip feed you them because we're figuring them out with you, the player. You know, Warframe's coolest freaking mind-blowing quest is 40 hours into the game. You know, it's insane how long you have to stick with it to see some of those rewards. But there's something interesting about that. That the best parts require you to tease them out and work for them.
Right.
I'm not really happy with that. We are currently struggling through a redesign of like the mod screen in the game. I literally met an acquaintance I hadn't seen in a while, and he said, I tried playing your game. And I opened that screen with all the cards and I thought, I'm not smart enough to play this game. And I didn't play it anymore. So we'd face this, right? I mean, Total Biscuit said, Warframe feels like a castle built on the ruins of a castle built on the ruins of a castle, right? If you tour Ireland, you can see that everywhere. I mean, that's, you know, that's what's cool about Ashford's Castle, is that they thought the place was so awesome, they kept building new spots on it. I'm not actually really ashamed of the fact that we've lived so long that there's a bit of cruft underneath, because we keep changing and evolving and building on top of that. But it is a huge problem, and I think about it every day.
Right.
How awful that onboarding can be. And we take slow steps for it. And I remember Rafe Koster is one of my favorite game designers, and his book Theory of Fun is just like my go-to. He wrote about how many times they changed the new player experience for Star Wars Galaxy.
Right.
And every time it did not affect their washout rate.
Really?
Yep. Here again, we redid it again. Nope, retention's not any better. We still have this many % of people load it up, play it for a bit, and never come back. So, and we've done the same, you know. We work on this and we try to fix those things. We get stats and numbers and we get data scientists. So.
Why do you think that is?
Why do I think that is?
Yeah.
I think probably there's a huge pool of people that are, well, I think people are smart. They look at it, they see that complexity, they know, they smell that means this game is going to take a lot of mental energy. And you're going to have to read Wikipedia if you want to min-max it. And they know, I'm either in for that or I'm out for that.
Right.
Does this Netflix series have 24 episodes or 10? Right? It's a big commitment to play Warframe. It's enjoyable, I think, even in those early times to play it, and those are things that we work on. But the worst part of not the worst part, but one of the big parts of my job, which is kind of roadmap guy, is how much time are we going to burn on a new player, and how much time are we going to give to that 1,000-hour player who loves the game but he's out of stuff to do? Because we're PvE, right? You know, we have PvP in the game, but it isn't the sustaining thing like it is in other games where that's the sole function. So I need to keep changing and evolving. I need a new quest, I need a new game mode, I need a new this to keep those players engaged. But the new player isn't going to see that stuff anyway. It's all locked behind some kind of mastery rank. Right. So that balance is really agonizing.
Does it feel like you're getting better at putting the track in front of the train? Is it any less stressful? Is it any, like, when you get that runway, does it feel better? Or is it just a different type of worry?
Yeah, that's a good question. It doesn't feel better, I don't think, because what did they say? The strongest motivators for humans is loss aversion, right? What is it? What is the thing? You know, there's that kind of gambling thing, like, will you risk to give up more than you can gain? And loss aversion is more powerful. And so that makes people risk averse, right? So, and I told you about the stagnation pustule problem I have. So as Warframe has gotten better, we always feel like that kind of plane that's just diving into the ocean and you can hear the bolts rattling. Because what we do is we take bigger risks. So last year we said, okay, we're not going to just do another tile set. We're going to go open world, right? And so everyone's just like, right? And so we've used that runway just to do crazier and wackier things. With mixed results, that's worked really well for us. That brought in more new users and kept them than redoing the front end all the times that we've done it. So, but yeah, that is the thing is we don't, we're responsive to player tastes. We do an experiment, we see how the player reactions are, and we adapt. That means you can't have a 2-year roadmap. It just doesn't make any sense.
Right. I mean, you're a small team who has managed to do a very, make this process of developing games work, like process. On a financial level or whatever.
Process.
And also in terms of the community you built and stuff. And obviously it's a space that more people are trying to get into. Some big fish are trying to get into as well. Do you see a lot of people trying to emulate what you're doing, or do you think you were just kind of first into a market that a lot of people are now trying to, the whole idea of having games that are constantly updated?
Yeah, I think we have heard it, I don't want to name names necessarily, but when we were at conferences and we felt like we're small and NVIDIA was being kind enough to give us 4 machines so that Rebecca could stand with a $5 off platinum coupon. Come try this game, please. Even at that phase, she was having conversations with people from other very large companies saying, we're looking at Warframe and that's how we want to run our game. That didn't please me greatly, as much as it is a compliment. Yeah, I see that, and then I see other people maybe not. You can't take from another game without seeing the context of that game.
Right.
You need to pull something from that game. Any design that you lift from something else is wrapped up in that context. So it needs to kind of be interpreted through your game. You can't just, early on in Warframe, we'd have players say, why don't you just sell skins like League of Legends? I'm like, gee, why don't we do what that $1 billion a year company does for our game that doesn't make any money? Right. So you can't transplant those things. So word of warning to those people that want to copy Warframe, you have to kind of make it your own.
Right.
But some of the times in the conversations I've had lately about, well, it's like Warframe, but this, and then you listen to everything they're saying, and you're like, well, it doesn't really sound like you maybe get that respect to the audience,
right.
Or that you get that the updates are entertainment and there's a theatrical aspect to this, or that that pipeline you're thinking of is going to have to change in 3 months when people wear out on it.
Right.
So
there must be an element of like I fucking told you so or something as well, because especially when especially in your case where you're literally shopping an idea around and people are saying no, and then it comes out and now everyone's suddenly getting on.
You are not wrong, and I think the first person that said exactly that was Tom Marks was talking to us at our, I think it was our first TimeCon. He was like, didn't even want to say fucking told you so, right? Didn't that feel good? And I think even then and even now, if like a shark, right? If we're not moving and changing and adapting and challenging ourselves, we know we're dead. We know that. So it's very easy. It's hard to take it for granted and say, aha, we've made it, because now we have more problems than ever.
Right.
Right. Every time we have an update that does really well, we want to congratulate ourselves. But now the server infrastructure has to change, or the database load's different, or it's too grindy, or we rushed it in some way and it's awful for a new player. So by challenging ourselves, that means we have all of these complexity problems that you go, and so we don't, maybe we don't celebrate it enough because we're so obsessed and we're so connected to that kind of voracious appetite that our audience has. it really, I think, is interesting, and I think it's important not only for players to challenge them, but for the team that makes it, because you're going to burn out, just like a player would burn out to see the same thing. So, you know, last year, this year, what is it going to be like in 10 years? I don't know. I have a few wacky ideas, and I'm excited to try those. And because people have supported us for so long, it's given us the opportunity to say, well, it isn't just one art set. Let's really blow it up and grow it, because now we have that runway and those resources to try it. Yeah. So we can get back almost to those completely infeasible dreams we had with the MMO Warframe, or well, it was called Dark Sector back then, but we can get back to those ideas and try kind of more weird things. So it's very liberating, if not a little anxious.